Before we dive into this jaw-dropping true story, pause for a second. If you love powerful stories that hit deep, don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop a comment telling us what you do in her place. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Sarah always thought she had her life mapped out, clear, controlled, and climbing steadily upward. She owned a small but promising tech startup in Seattle, one she'd built from the ground up over 7 years. Her days were a relentless blur of meetings, pitches, and managing a small but dedicated team. And at home she had Mark, her husband of 5 years, who she trusted to handle the personal side of things while she focused on her career. It was early October when everything began to unravel. The morning had started like any other. Sarah woke up to the soft Seattle drizzle tapping on the windowpane, the faint hum of city life just starting to stir. She kissed Mark goodbye before rushing off to the office, already running late for a pitch with a potential investor. But by midday, her phone rang, and the voice on the other end sent a shiver down her spine. "Sarah, you need to get to the hospital. It's urgent." First, she thought it was a mistake. But a sudden, sharp pain in her chest made her collapse just moments later. The diagnosis was swift and brutal, a rare autoimmune condition that flared up without warning. She was admitted immediately, her world shrinking to sterile hospital walls, machines beeping, and the endless ache of uncertainty. Mark stayed by her side the first few days, his face pale but reassuring. He promised he'd handle everything: work, bills, the company. Sarah clung to that promise, focusing on her treatment, imagining when she'd return to the life she built. But when she was finally discharged, weeks later, the home that greeted her was unrecognizable. Boxes lined the living room floor, the furniture rearranged. The company's accountant awaited her with a look that told her everything she feared. "Sarah, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news," he said gently, "but Mark has emptied the company accounts. There's barely enough left to pay the rent, let alone salaries or debts." Her heart sank deeper than the physical pain she'd endured. The man she'd loved and trusted had betrayed not just her but everyone who believed in the company's future. That night, alone in the quiet house, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She would file for divorce. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the sheer curtains of Sarah's bedroom, casting a pale glow over the room that still felt foreign after weeks away. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the phone in her hand. Her lifeline, and lately a source of nothing but bad news. Mark hadn't returned her calls. Not once. She had tried to believe in him when she was sick, had tried to see the man who'd promised to protect their future. But now, faced with the cold reality, she was forced to confront the cracks that had been there all along, hidden beneath layers of smiles and shared memories. She rose slowly, the muscles in her legs still weak from the hospital stay, and walked into the living room. The walls echoed with silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floors. Papers and unopened bills cluttered the dining table, a chaotic reminder of the financial disaster Mark had left behind. The company's accountant, David, was there again, this time with more grim news. "We're looking at a deficit of nearly $200,000, he explained, voice low but steady. Mark used company funds for personal expenses, a new car, vacations, and even some cash transfers that don't add up. It looks like he was running up a serious debt while you were hospitalized." Sarah's throat tightened. She fought the rising panic, forcing herself to breathe deeply. "Is there anything left? Any way to salvage this?" David shook his head slowly. "The investors are nervous. Some have already started pulling out. If this keeps up, the company might have to declare bankruptcy within months." The words hit harder than any physical pain she had endured. This company was her baby. Every late night, every sacrifice, every risk she had taken. It wasn't just a business. It was her identity. That afternoon, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through old emails and bank statements, piecing together the extent of Mark's betrayal. She found a string of secret credit card bills, extravagant charges to exclusive restaurants and luxury hotels, places she'd never been invited to. The realization sank in. He had lived a double life, enjoying a lifestyle she had no idea about while she fought to survive. Her phone buzzed suddenly. A message from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me. Coffee, 3 p.m. Her heart raced. Who could this be? Was it someone connected to Mark's secret life? Or maybe someone who wanted to help? Against every instinct, she texted back, "I'll be there." That afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting in a small, crowded cafe downtown, the smell of roasted coffee beans filling the air. A man approached her table, mid-30s, with a serious expression and a folder under his arm. "Sarah," he asked quietly. "I'm Jason. I used to work with Mark." She nodded, eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" Jason sighed. "Look, I didn't want to get involved. But when I heard what happened, I thought you should know the truth. Mark wasn't just careless with money. He was involved in something bigger. Illegal deals, shady partners. It's why the company's in trouble." Sarah's mind reeled. It was more than she could handle. Betrayal, financial ruin, and now potentially criminal activity. She clenched her fists. "I'll find a way out. I have to." The days that followed the meeting with Jason blurred into a relentless swirl of phone calls, emails, and sleepless nights. Sarah felt like she was swimming against a tide that kept pulling her deeper under. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on her chest, but beneath it, a steely determination took root. She returned to the office, a modest open-space loft in downtown Seattle, that afternoon, stepping carefully over empty desks and stacks of unpaid invoices. The air was thick with tension, and the few employees left cast cautious glances her way. Rumors had already begun to spread. David, the accountant, met her at the door, face grave but hopeful. "I've managed to freeze some accounts, prevent a few creditors from coming after us immediately. But this is only a temporary fix." Sarah nodded, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks, David. We need to pull together. I'm going to call a meeting." In the conference room, she faced her small team, the backbone of the company, and laid everything bare. No sugarcoating, no excuses. "Mark's actions have put us in jeopardy," she began, voice steady but heavy. "We're fighting for this company, for the future we all believe in. I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep it alive." There were murmurs of support, but also visible worry. One of the senior developers, Mia, raised her hand hesitantly. "Sarah, do you think the investors will stick with us after this? It feels like everything's falling apart." "I don't know," Sarah admitted honestly. "But I'm not giving up. Not yet." That night, she pored over financial reports, trying to map out a strategy. The company needed a miracle, or at least a serious plan to cut losses, regain trust, and find new investors. But Sarah's mind kept drifting back to Mark. Why had he done this? Was it just greed or something darker? She decided to dig deeper into Mark's recent activities. With Jason's help, she accessed emails and messages that revealed unsettling conversations. Mentions of a deal that sounded more like a bribe, transfers to unknown accounts, and frantic warnings from an associate. The pieces began to fit together. Mark's betrayal was tangled in something bigger than just personal greed. It involved people who didn't hesitate to cross legal lines. As Sarah wrestled with this new truth, her phone rang. It was her lawyer, Emily. "We need to talk," Emily said briskly. "There's more you should know about your marriage, and it could affect the divorce proceedings." Sarah swallowed hard, bracing herself. Emily continued. "Mark has filed some paperwork of his own, claims of debts you supposedly owe, and attempts to tie up your assets." "Of course," Sarah muttered bitterly. "He wants to make this as difficult as possible." "Exactly. We need to prepare for a battle, Sarah." Later that night, alone in her apartment, Sarah allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She looked around at the silence, the half-unpacked boxes, the cold emptiness where trust used to live. She whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The following week was a relentless assault on Sarah's nerves and spirit. She moved through the days like a soldier on the front line, juggling meetings with lawyers, desperate calls to remaining investors, and long hours at the office trying to keep her company afloat. The city around her moved on, oblivious to the private war she was fighting within the walls of glass and steel. Sarah's mornings started earlier than ever before. The soft, gray light of Seattle barely seeped through her apartment window when she was already scanning emails and financial reports, each one a reminder of how precarious everything had become. Mark's betrayals weren't just financial. They were deeply personal, cutting into every part of her life she thought was secure. Emily, her attorney, was both a shield and a sword. Their conversations were tactical, often exhausting, and always with the looming threat of Mark's next move hanging over every word. "Mark's attorneys are pushing hard," Emily warned during one of their meetings in a small, cluttered office downtown. "They're trying to freeze your assets and delay the divorce process indefinitely. It's a dirty game, but we're prepared to fight." Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. "I don't care how long it takes. I just want to end this." At the office, the atmosphere was tense but determined. Sarah's team had rallied around her leadership, but the stress was palpable. Mia and the developers worked overtime to patch up glitches and develop new pitches for potential investors, while David kept a close eye on every dollar. One afternoon, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room, staring at a whiteboard filled with figures and timelines. The company's survival depended on finding new capital fast, but investors needed proof that the business wasn't sinking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jason. "We need to talk. It's about Mark's partners." They met that evening at a quiet bar on Capitol Hill. Jason's face was grim as he slid a manila envelope across the table. "These are copies of documents and emails I managed to get," he said quietly. "Contracts, money transfers, and conversations implicating some serious fraud." Mark wasn't acting alone. Sarah flipped through the papers, the weight of the evidence pressing down on her. "If this goes public," she began. Jason nodded. "It could destroy everything. But it could also be leveraged to force a settlement, or at least pressure his partners to back off." Sarah's mind raced. She had to balance the risk of exposing the scandal with the desperate need to protect what little remained of her company and reputation. Back at her apartment, exhaustion finally caught up to her. She sank onto the couch, her phone buzzing again. A call from her mother. "Sarah, honey, how are you holding up?" Her mother's voice was gentle but worried. "I'm managing," Sarah replied, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "It's just harder than I imagined. You're stronger than you know. Remember, you're not alone in this." Her mother's words stirred something deep inside her, a reminder that even in her darkest moments, she had people who cared. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She drafted a detailed letter to the remaining investors and employees, laying out the truth as clearly as she could. Transparency would be her weapon against fear and rumors. That evening, as she hit send on the email, a quiet sense of resolve settled over her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was reclaiming control. The response to Sarah's letter was swift and mixed. Some investors appreciated her honesty and grit, pledging to stick with the company despite the turmoil. Others hesitated, their doubts casting long shadows over the fragile hope she clung to. At the office, the tension was palpable. Meetings stretched late into the night, with heated discussions about cost-cutting measures, potential partnerships, and legal strategies. Sarah found herself caught between the relentless demands of running the business and the personal chaos Mark's betrayal had unleashed. One afternoon, while reviewing contracts, her phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Mark's legal team just filed a motion to freeze all personal assets. "We need to move fast." Sarah's stomach tightened. Every step forward seemed to come with 2 steps back. That evening, she met with Jason again at a small cafe. Their conversation urgent. "I've been digging deeper," Jason said, eyes dark with concern. "Mark's partners aren't just shady, they're dangerous. Organized crime links. This isn't just financial ruin. It could get violent." Sarah swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "We need to build a case, but carefully. If they catch wind we're onto them, it could get ugly. The stakes had risen beyond business and divorce. Sarah was navigating a minefield, where every move could trigger a disaster. Meanwhile, Mark remained unreachable. His silence spoke volumes, a cruel reminder of how alone she truly was. But Sarah refused to crumble. In the quiet moments, she found strength in memories of why she started the company. A dream to innovate, to make a difference, to build something lasting. That vision became her anchor. One night, after a grueling day, Sarah sat at her kitchen table surrounded by documents and notes. Her phone rang. It was Emily. "We got a lead. One of Mark's partners has been arrested in another state. It's a break." Relief flooded through her, but she knew this was just the beginning of a long road. Sarah closed her eyes and whispered, "This time I'm fighting for everything." The early morning fog hung heavy over Seattle as Sarah arrived at the office, a steaming cup of coffee in hand and exhaustion lining her face. The city was waking up around her. Buses rattling down wet streets, the faint buzz of early commuters, but inside her world, the clock never stopped ticking. She was greeted by tired but determined faces. Her team was stretched thin, working late nights and weekends to keep the company afloat while the legal battles and financial crises mounted. Sarah could see it in their eyes, the same fierce loyalty she felt, mixed with anxiety about the uncertain future. David, the accountant, was already waiting for her at the conference table, surrounded by stacks of invoices and spreadsheets. "We've got a small window," he said quietly, rubbing his temples. "The new lead Emily mentioned could buy us some time, but we have to act fast to secure emergency funding." Sarah nodded, already mentally drafting calls and proposals. But beneath the urgency, her mind drifted back to Mark, the man who had turned her world upside down. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Jason. "Meeting tomorrow with a federal agent. It's about the case." Sarah's heart pounded. The involvement of federal authorities meant things were escalating beyond what she'd imagined. That night, sleep was elusive. She lay awake in her apartment, the ceiling above her a blank canvas for the swirling fears and hopes battling in her mind. She thought about the hospital bed where her health had first failed her, the sterile smell, the loneliness. And now this, the fight to reclaim not just a company but her life. The next morning, she met with Emily and Jason at a discreet cafe, the kind where whispered conversations went unnoticed. The federal agent, Agent Michaels, arrived shortly after. A stern woman with sharp eyes, she didn't waste time. "Ms. Collins," she began, "we've been tracking Mark's activities for months. Your information has been crucial. We believe his partners are involved in money laundering and fraud on a national scale." Sarah felt the weight of the words but steeled herself. "What do you need from me?" Agent Michaels slid a file across the table. "Your cooperation. Testimony. Anything that can help us bring these people down." Sarah glanced at Jason, who nodded reassuringly. "This isn't just about the company anymore," Agent Michaels continued. "It's about justice." Over the next days, Sarah found herself navigating a new battlefield, one where the stakes were higher, the risks more personal. She was interviewed multiple times, each session dredging up painful memories and exposing the deep wounds Mark's betrayal had left. At the same time, she threw herself into salvaging her business. New pitches were crafted, partnerships explored, and every call made with the urgency of someone who had nothing left to lose. One evening, as she closed her laptop, a message popped up on her phone. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" It was from Mark. Her hands trembled. Was this a trap? A desperate plea? She stared at the message long after the screen dimmed, then deleted it without reply. Sarah knew one thing clearly. This was her fight now, and she would see it through to the end. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. Seattle's skies were slate gray, blanketing the city in a slow, steady downpour that seemed to echo Sarah's internal storm. From the window of her office, she watched the rivulets slide down the glass, her reflection faint and tired. Inside, the building was quieter than usual. Half her team had gone remote, and those who remained walked the halls with subdued voices and hurried steps. Sarah sat in the boardroom alone, her fingers brushing over a stack of investor reports and legal documents. Everything she touched these days felt like a live wire. Jason entered quietly, closing the door behind him. He looked worn, like someone who'd seen too much, slept too little. "I got something," he said without ceremony, laying a flash drive on the table. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "More on Mark." Jason nodded. "And his partners." "I traced a series of shell companies. Mark funneled over $800,000 through fake accounts in Delaware, then overseas. He had help, Sarah. Real help. This isn't amateur embezzlement. This is organized, intentional fraud." She picked up the flash drive, staring at it like it held the weight of everything she'd lost. In a way it did. "Do the feds know?" she asked. "Not yet. I wanted you to see it first. You're in deeper than I thought, and you need to decide how far you're willing to go." Sarah exhaled slowly, trying to summon clarity through the fog of exhaustion. "I want everything on record," she said. "We do this right. We do it clean. No shortcuts." Jason nodded approvingly. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." But even as the pieces of Mark's betrayal became clearer, another reality was closing in, one Sarah could no longer ignore. She was running out of money. Despite the positive signals from a handful of potential investors, no one had signed on the dotted line. The company was surviving on fumes. Paychecks were late. Rent on the office was overdue. And the legal fees. They were mounting like waves in a storm. Later that day, she met with David, who walked her through a last resort proposal. "Sell part of the company. If you divest 40%, we could keep the lights on for another 6 months, he said gently. "It's not ideal, but it buys you time." Sarah stared at the paperwork, heart sinking. Giving up control was the very thing she'd sworn never to do. But what choice did she have? "I'll think about it," she said. That evening, she drove out of the city, chasing space, silence, and something that felt like clarity. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, mist hanging over the trees. She pulled into a coastal overlook, the sea crashing below, and stepped out into the wind. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry. Not just for the betrayal, not just for the company, but for the person she used to be. The one who believed that love was enough, that trust could be unconditional, that people didn't destroy the things they built together. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Voicemail. From Emily. "Call me back. Mark is attempting to block the asset freeze. He filed a motion claiming you were complicit in the financial transfers." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Complicit. She stared at the sea, the waves violent, relentless. Mark wasn't just trying to ruin her financially. He was trying to rewrite the narrative entirely. He wanted to drag her down with him. And he was willing to lie to do it. The storm inside her sharpened into something clearer, harder. Resolve. This wasn't just about saving her company anymore. It was about proving she hadn't just survived, she was fighting back. By the time Sarah returned to the city, it was almost midnight. The roads were slick and mostly empty, the orange glow of the streetlights painting long, fractured shadows on the pavement. She pulled into her garage, sat for a moment in the dark silence of the car, then finally made her way upstairs. She didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at her kitchen counter, flipping through documents and trying to process what Emily had said in the voicemail. Mark claimed she was complicit. The audacity of it made her stomach turn. The man had stolen from her, betrayed their marriage, funneled money through shadow accounts, and now he was trying to rewrite the truth as if she'd been part of it all. It wasn't just a lie, it was a tactical weapon. If he could get the court to believe she had a hand in the fraud, she'd lose everything. The company, the divorce settlement, her credibility, and possibly even her freedom. By morning, her apartment looked like a scene from a crime show. Papers scattered across the table, red underlines and sticky notes dotting legal printouts and spreadsheets. A war room built in desperation. She called Emily at dawn. "He's trying to destroy me," Sarah said, skipping the greeting. "I know," Emily replied calmly. "But we're not going to let him." I've already filed a counter-motion. But Sarah, it's time we brought out the big guns. I need you to be honest with me. Do you have everything? Bank records, emails, receipts. Anything that shows what he was doing behind your back. I've got most of it, Sarah said. Jason gave me copies of Mark's transactions. I'm still going through them. Get them all to me by noon. Every last one. If we can establish a clear timeline, especially showing that some of this happened while you were hospitalized, we can build an airtight case. That word again, hospitalized. It had become a painful landmark in her story. 3 weeks in a sterile room. Her body fighting to heal while her husband drained their accounts in the background. It wasn't just betrayal. It was abandonment. Later that morning, Jason met her at the office. He looked like he hadn't slept either. I ran a forensic analysis on the flash drive, he said, dropping a folder onto her desk. It's worse than I thought. Mark created fake vendor contracts. He paid himself through a shell company posing as a supplier. He even forged your signature on some of the documents. Sarah's hands tightened around the folder. That's criminal fraud, she muttered. Jason nodded. The feds already think so. I spoke to Agent Michaels this morning. She's building a case. If we hand this over, it could tip the scale. Sarah walked to the window. The city below looked deceptively peaceful. Cars moved like ants, unaware of the storm brewing above them. I want to testify, she said finally. Jason blinked. Are you sure? Yes. I want my voice on record. I'm not going to let him turn me into the villain in my own story. They spent the rest of the day preparing the evidence, labeling every file, every transfer, every forged signature. Sarah barely paused to eat. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Emily, vendors, creditors, worried friends, but she ignored most of them. She was locked in. Around 6 p.m., she sat in the dimly lit conference room with Jason and Emily. The final files loaded into a secure drive. This is it, Emily said. We submit this in the morning. It won't end things immediately, but it will shift momentum. And Sarah, she leaned in, voice softer now, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. I know, Sarah said quietly. You're going to be questioned. You'll have to relive things you'd rather forget. They'll dig into every decision, every text message, every dollar. Are you ready for that? Sarah looked at both of them. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver. I didn't come this far to let him win. Emily nodded. Then let's burn it all down. The courthouse sat like a fortress in the center of downtown. Tall, gray, expressionless. A place where people came to fight, to surrender, to be judged. For Sarah, it had never felt more real than it did that morning. She stood in the hallway, the polished tile echoing each step, her heels tapping in rhythm with her heart. Jason was beside her, quietly reviewing notes. Emily was already inside, prepping the documents for submission. Sarah adjusted the cuffs of her dark blazer, her fingers trembling slightly. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. But she had never been more alert in her life. A door opened, and a court officer appeared. Ms. Collins. Sarah stepped forward. You're up. Inside the courtroom, the air was stiff with silence. A few reporters sat quietly in the gallery, pens ready. At the opposing table sat Mark. Calm, too calm, with his new lawyer, a slick man in $1,000 suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mark didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He already thought he had control. Sarah walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Then came the questions. First they were clinical: name, position, background, the story of how she built her company from the ground up. But soon, Emily steered the questioning toward the heart of the matter. Ms. Collins, can you tell the court what you discovered upon returning from your medical leave? Sarah took a breath. My company's primary business account had been emptied. My operating capital was gone. There were payments I never approved, signatures that weren't mine. And it all happened while I was hospitalized, recovering from emergency surgery. And who had access to your accounts during that time? My husband, she said without hesitation. Mark Collins. The courtroom was silent. Emily clicked a remote, projecting a spreadsheet onto the wall. Let the record show that between April 2nd and April 21st, over $780,000 was transferred to 3 accounts tied to businesses registered under shell corporations. 2 of those corporations list Mr. Mark Collins as a silent partner. Sarah kept her gaze straight. She could feel Mark's lawyer shift in his seat. Emily continued, calmly and precisely building the timeline, transaction by transaction, email by email. With each piece of evidence presented, Mark's defenses seemed to shrink. His posture tightened, jaw clenched. Then it was the defense's turn. Mark's lawyer stood and approached the stand with the practiced smoothness of a man who knew how to disarm a jury. Ms. Collins, he began, voice almost soothing, you claim you were unaware of these financial transfers. And yet, your signature appears on several documents. Are you suggesting you had no knowledge of these activities at all? I'm not suggesting. I'm stating it as fact. So you're saying your husband forged your signature? Yes. Do you have any proof that he did? Sarah didn't hesitate. The forensics team compared the signature on those contracts with verified examples of mine. They concluded the signatures were forged. That report was submitted as evidence this morning. The lawyer narrowed his eyes. Isn't it possible that in your weakened medical state, you misunderstood some of these transactions? Or perhaps even approved them without fully remembering? Sarah leaned forward, her voice cold and steady. No. I wasn't sedated for 3 weeks. I was recovering from surgery, not suffering from amnesia. I didn't authorize any of it, and the evidence proves that. The lawyer paced, trying to throw her off. Ms. Collins, is it true that your company was already in financial decline before your hospitalization? No, she said. That's a lie. We had secured new contracts. We were stable, even growing. Mark's actions are the only reason we hit crisis. Then how do you explain your recent attempts to secure emergency funding? Because he stole my capital, she snapped. Because he didn't just take money. He broke the business I spent a decade building. Her voice echoed louder than she meant, and the judge raised a hand. Let's keep things civil, he warned. Sarah sat back, breathing hard. The lawyer nodded, as if satisfied, and returned to his table. When court adjourned for lunch, Sarah walked out into the hall, her body tense, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Jason met her with a silent nod of approval. Emily gave her a half-smile. You did good, she said. You kept control. But Sarah didn't feel calm. She felt like a dam ready to burst. She walked out of the building, ignoring the light drizzle that had started to fall, and found herself standing alone on the sidewalk. The city moved around her, busy, unaware, as her life spun deeper into chaos. She pulled out her phone and opened a message from a number she didn't recognize. I know what Mark did. Can help. Meet me. Discretion is everything. Attached was an address. No name. Sarah stared at the screen, her blood running cold. A choice lay ahead. The courtroom battle was one front, but something else was unfolding in the shadows. Someone out there knew more. And she couldn't afford to ignore it. Sarah stared at the address on her screen for a long time. The message was anonymous. No name. No signature. Just the promise of information and the warning that discretion is everything. Everything in her life had already been turned upside down. Her company, her marriage, her reputation. This message could be bait, trap. But it could also be the key to ending it all. Her instincts, sharpened by weeks of betrayal and cold courtroom logic, told her this wasn't random. Someone knew something. She texted Jason. I got a message. Someone claims they know what Mark did. Wants to meet. Discreet. Sending you the address. Jay, want me to come with? No. If it feels off, I'll walk. Just track me. Jay, already on it. Be careful. It was almost dusk when Sarah arrived. The address led her to an industrial district just outside downtown, a stretch of warehouses and distribution centers, half of which looked abandoned. She parked across the street and studied the building. It was an old mechanic's garage, boarded windows, a single flickering exterior light above the door. No signage. No movement. A deep breath, then another. She walked up to the door and knocked. Seconds passed. Then the door opened. A woman stood on the other side, early 40s, sharp features, dressed in dark jeans and a navy windbreaker. She looked Sarah over, eyes scanning, calculating. "You came alone." Sarah nodded. "You sent the message." The woman stepped aside. Inside. "We don't have much time." Inside, the garage was stripped down. No cars, no equipment, just a folding table and 2 metal chairs under a dangling bulb. On the table sat a tablet, a thick manila folder, and 2 disposable phones. "My name's Natalie," the woman said finally. "Used to work in private banking. I handled compliance audits for offshore accounts." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "So how do you know Mark?" "I don't," Natalie said. "But I know who does." She slid the folder toward Sarah. "Your husband didn't act alone. He wasn't smart enough. He was coached by a man named Victor Reyes. He runs a boutique wealth firm in the Caribbean. Completely off-book. Clients include embezzlers, politicians, and corporate raiders. They specialize in making money disappear." Sarah flipped open the folder. Inside were account records, passport scans, email transcripts, and internal memos from the firm, all marked confidential. One caught her eye. Mark's name linked to a numbered account in Nassau. Transactions traced back to Reyes Capital Holdings. "This is real?" Sarah asked. "Every word," Natalie replied. "I stole it. Took it before I left the firm. I've been looking for the right person to bring it down. And your case, your story, it's the wedge." Sarah looked up. "Why now?" "Because I know what it's like to be used and thrown away. I gave years to that company. When I tried to blow the whistle, they blackballed me. No job. No pension. I lost everything. And I'm tired of staying quiet." Sarah leaned back in her chair. Her mind was racing. "If I bring this to court..." "You won't." "Not yet," Natalie interrupted. "If you go public too soon, they'll shut down everything and vanish. You'll lose your leverage. But if you're smart, you use this as pressure. Apply it quietly. Get what you need first, then destroy them." It was risky. It was dangerous. But it was leverage. And for the first time in weeks, Sarah had the upper hand. "What do you want in return?" she asked. Natalie hesitated. "I want immunity. And I want to see Victor fall. That's it." Sarah stood. "Then we help each other." They shook hands. 2 women who had been chewed up by the system, now stepping into the fire together. Back in her apartment that night, Sarah spread the folder across her kitchen table. Jason arrived minutes later, breathless. "Are you insane?" he asked. "Meeting a stranger alone. That could have gone so wrong." "But it didn't," Sarah said, sliding the documents toward him. "And now we have everything." Jason flipped through the papers. His eyes widened. This is a smoking gun." "No," Sarah said, pouring herself a glass of whiskey. "It's the whole damn armory." The next morning, Emily sat across from her, reading through the packet in stunned silence. "If this holds up, we can bury them. But it also puts you in danger. Mark isn't the final boss here, Sarah. These people play dirty." "I'm already at war," Sarah said. "Let's finish it." Emily looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. Quiet ones. We need a federal prosecutor who can be trusted. And we need to time it perfectly." They were no longer just defending Sarah. They were preparing to take down an entire network. For days, Sarah lived in a state of dual existence. By morning, she was the image of controlled fury. Polished blazers, concise testimony, legal strategy meetings. Her face appeared in news briefs now. The high-profile divorce case of a betrayed CEO drawing growing attention. The headlines were still cautious, but the tone was shifting. People were starting to believe her. But by night she became something else. A strategist, a tactician, even a little bit of a conspirator. Natalie's documents had blown the case wide open. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the wiring instructions. They painted a picture not only of fraud but of intent. Sarah and Jason spent hours cross-referencing the data with Mark's known movements, building a map that revealed far more than even Emily had anticipated. At the center of it all, Victor Reyes. A ghost. No social media. No press appearances. No paper trail under his real name. But one thing Sarah had learned from building a company from scratch: every man, no matter how careful, leaves footprints. And she was going to follow them. Jason tracked Reyes's network through financial backdoors. It took them 2 days to discover that one of his consultants regularly wired money to a high-end concierge firm in Manhattan, the kind that arranged everything from private jets to midnight table reservations. Sarah used a contact from her early venture capital days to push for a name. A private charter booked under a dummy LLC. Headed to Miami the same week Mark began his transfers. From there, things clicked into place. Reyes operated out of a private residence on Star Island, the gated paradise of Florida's elite. Protected, unreachable, and surrounded by silence. But not immune. That Friday, Sarah called an emergency strategy meeting in her apartment. Emily, Jason, and now Natalie sat at her long dining table, papers and coffee spread out between them like generals preparing a siege. "I want to make this personal," Sarah said. "No more playing nice. Mark wanted a war. Fine. Let's give him one." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I'm with you. But define personal." "We go to the people who matter most to him," Sarah replied. "The board members he wants to impress. His investors. The ones who don't know he's tied to an offshore laundering network. We send quiet messages. Evidence. Questions they'll be too afraid not to ask." "You want to squeeze him," Jason said. "Pressure from the inside." "Exactly." They spent the next 72 hours preparing anonymous leaks. Jason wrote data summaries scrubbed of identifiers but clear enough to scare a compliance officer out of sleep. Natalie helped craft timelines with just enough implication to feel like legal landmines. Emily used her connections in legal circles to feed rumors to corporate attorneys. Not accusations, just the soft suggestion of scandal. Then, one by one, they dropped the pieces. Emails, bills, hand-delivered envelopes. Timed with precision. Campaign built on fear and facts. And it worked. By Tuesday, Mark's largest investor had pulled out of a pending real estate deal. Supplier flagged concerns. A banking partner initiated an internal review. The buzz had started. Mark showed up at her office unannounced 3 days later. He stormed past the front desk, ignoring the receptionist's protests, and threw open Sarah's door like a man on fire. "You think you're clever," he snapped, eyes wild. "You think you can take me down with rumors?" Sarah stood slowly. "I don't need rumors, Mark. I have facts." He moved toward her, jaw clenched. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "No, I didn't," she said. "But I do now. And you're just a puppet. A sloppy one. You're playing with fire." She leaned in, voice steady. "Then get ready to burn." Security arrived seconds later. Mark was escorted out of the building, spitting threats. Sarah sat back down, shaking only slightly. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. Not because he was harmless, but because he was cornered. And cornered men were predictable. That night she got another message. This time from Natalie. "Reyes knows we're closing in. I have an old contact at Treasury. Meet me tomorrow. Don't be late." Sarah stared at the message. This was it. The final pieces were lining up. But it also meant escalation. The more noise they made, the more dangerous things could become. She shut off her phone and looked around her apartment. The silence felt loaded now. Tomorrow it wouldn't be. The next morning, the city was drenched in fog. Thick and gray, it wrapped around buildings and blurred the skyline, as if the world itself wanted to hide. Sarah pulled into a parking garage in Arlington at 6:58 a.m., 2 minutes early. Natalie had insisted on the time and location. A diner hidden beneath a worn-out bridge, where the coffee was bad and the surveillance worse. It was the kind of place where secrets could live out in the open, disguised by cheap bacon and trucker hats. Sarah spotted Natalie in a corner booth, nursing black coffee like it was whiskey. Across from her sat a man in his early 60s, gray hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that suggested military once, federal now. He didn't introduce himself. "I'm just here to listen," he said simply. Natalie nodded to Sarah. "Tell him." Sarah opened her messenger bag and slid the latest compiled documents across the table. Printouts, timelines, diagrams. She had stayed up past midnight building it. No legalese, no excess, just the truth. He took his time reviewing it. The occasional nod. Tight jaw. A long pause at a highlighted wire transfer that directly linked Reyes to a phony development fund in New Jersey. "I've seen pieces of this," he finally said, voice low. "We've suspected Reyes for years. Couldn't get close. People who talk tend to vanish." Sarah didn't flinch. "I'm not backing down." He looked at her, studying her like a man who had seen 100 people break before sunrise. "You're brave," he said. "But that doesn't make you untouchable. I'm not looking for protection. I'm looking for prosecution." A slow smile formed, thin and knowing. "That's what makes you dangerous." "Good." Natalie leaned forward. "So, will you help?" He hesitated. "I can't make it official. Not yet. But I'll escalate this. Quietly. If your evidence checks out, and I believe it will, we'll initiate a full investigation. Financial crimes, RICO, maybe even wire fraud across state lines. Mark will go down too," Sarah said. "He enabled this. He benefited from it." He nodded. "If he cashed in, he's part of it." He stood, folded the documents neatly into his bag, and dropped a few bills on the table. "Stay quiet. Stay smart. You've got a fire burning. Don't let it go out before it matters." Then he was gone. Back at her apartment, Sarah collapsed onto the couch, her brain running in a dozen directions at once. This was the moment she had been working toward. Not just the legal win, not just the divorce, but the truth, the reckoning, the thing Mark never thought would come. She pulled out her phone and started reviewing everything again. All the documents, all the calls. Jason had mapped the internal money trail. Emily had prepped depositions for the next court appearance. Natalie had arranged a shadow plan in case anyone tried to erase them. Still, none of them could prepare for what came next. That evening her doorbell rang. She checked the camera feed. No one. When she opened the door, there was only a small envelope on the ground. No address. No return label. Inside just one item, a single Polaroid. It was her. Outside the diner. That morning. Standing beside the federal contact. The photo was fresh. Taken from a distance. Her hand trembled as she turned it over. On the back, scrawled in red ink. "Stop digging." She slammed the door shut, heart pounding. Immediately she called Jason, Emily, and Natalie. Within 20 minutes, they were in her apartment. "They're watching you now," Natalie said, jaw tight. "Which means we're close. Too close." "They don't scare me," Sarah said. "They should," Natalie snapped. "These aren't boardroom snakes. These are people who disappear witnesses. You need to think very carefully about your next move." Jason stood near the window, staring out. "We need security. Physical. Real surveillance. From now on, none of us move alone." Emily, ever the strategist, stayed calm. "I'll call a contact with Homeland. Quietly. If someone's following you, we can get eyes on them too." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, the photo still in her hand. "They're trying to scare me. Just like Mark did. Just like the board did when they froze me out. I'm done being scared." She looked up, steel in her eyes. "They want to see what I'll do when I'm cornered." Silence. "Let's show them." The next morning, Sarah appeared on national television. Wearing a black blazer, speaking with deliberate calm, she gave her first public interview. She didn't name names, not yet. But she painted a picture of corruption, theft, betrayal, and silence. She spoke of offshore fraud, of betrayal from within, of a system that protects the powerful until someone fights back. Her story went viral within an hour. By nightfall, the financial world was on edge. And behind the scenes, Mark's empire began to tremble. By the time the sun rose on Monday, Sarah's name was everywhere. Major media outlets picked up the interview. The clip of her sitting across from the journalist, poised, calm, devastatingly direct, had racked up over 2 million views on social media. For the first time since her hospitalization, the narrative wasn't being written about her. It was being written by her. That morning, she stepped into the courthouse to resume the divorce proceedings, but the mood had shifted. Reporters lingered on the sidewalk, whispers filled the halls, and even the judge eyed her differently. Not with pity, not with skepticism, but with a quiet acknowledgement. She was no longer the victim. She was the storm. Mark didn't show up in court that day. His lawyer claimed unforeseen circumstances. Sarah knew better. He was hiding. And not just from her. Because the house of cards was falling. That afternoon, Emily received a call from the Department of Justice. Discreet but official. The investigation into Reyes was active now. And Mark was being listed as a domestic affiliate of interest. Jason confirmed that 2 of Mark's former partners had suddenly lawyered up, and a forensic audit had been triggered on one of their shared tech ventures. People were panicking. Lines were being drawn. And Sarah was preparing for the kill shot. Later that night, as the city lights blinked in and out across her windows, Sarah sat at her desk alone, going over one final asset, the recording. Weeks ago, she'd installed a hidden mic in her former home office, back when she first suspected Mark was planning something. She had left it running for days, more out of desperation than strategy. She had almost forgotten about it. But the files were still there, quietly uploaded to her cloud. She listened now, heart pounding as she skipped through hours of ambient noise and silence. Then suddenly a voice. Mark's voice. So we funnel the money through Nassau first, then flip it through Reyes. That's what he said. Keep Sarah's name off the paperwork. If this goes bad, it's her company that takes the hit. Another voice, lower, cautious. That's wire fraud. It's traceable. Mark. Not if she doesn't wake up. She's in a hospital bed. No one's looking. The sound of a glass clinking. Laughter. Then silence. Sarah sat perfectly still, the audio still echoing in her ears. She had him. In his own words. Jason nearly dropped his phone when she sent him the file. This is it, he said. This is the evidence they couldn't ignore even if they wanted to. Emily agreed. We release this strategically. First we send it to DOJ. Then, if Mark tries to spin anything publicly, we let it go viral. The kind of viral that melts servers. But once it's out, Natalie warned, there's no turning back. You'll be painting a target on your back. On all of us. Sarah looked out the window. She wasn't afraid anymore. Let them come. That Friday, Sarah received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. But something told her to pick up. The voice was hoarse. Well, nervous. You don't know me. But you need to listen. They're going after your family. She froze. What? Your sister. In Oregon. They've been watching her. You make one more move, they'll hit her first. Don't ask who I am. Just stop. Before this gets worse. The line went dead. Sarah didn't speak. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just moved. Within the hour, she had booked a private security team and arranged for her sister, Lila, and her 2 kids to be escorted to a safe house under assumed names. She didn't tell them the full reason, just that it was about the divorce, that things were escalating, that she needed them to trust her. Lila did. She always had. But Sarah's hands trembled as she hung up. Because now, the cost of her war was no longer just hers. It was spreading. Back in her apartment, she stood before a whiteboard with photos, maps, and printed emails scattered like a detective's war map. Emily, Jason, and Natalie all stood behind her in silence. We push forward, Sarah said finally. We finish this. But they're threatening your family now, Emily said. You sure you want to escalate? Sarah turned. They didn't just steal from me. They tried to erase me. Then they threatened the people I love. If I back down now, they win forever. And that's not happening. She tapped the recording on her tablet. We take this to the federal agent. Now. That night, a black SUV rolled up quietly outside an unmarked federal building. Sarah stepped out with a recording in hand, coat buttoned tight, hair tied back. She walked through security, past armed guards, and into the building where the real war would begin. By morning, warrants would be issued. Mark would be cornered. And Reyes. He would finally be pulled into the light. For the first time in weeks, the city didn't feel overwhelming to Sarah. She stood at the top of the courthouse steps just after dawn, flanked by Emily and Jason, her coat billowing slightly in the cold morning wind. In her hand, a flash drive, one that contained Mark's damning recorded confession, wire records, forged contracts, and Reyes's transaction trail across 3 continents. And inside the courthouse, a federal grand jury waited. The war she'd fought in shadows was now public, and Sarah was walking straight into the fire. The testimony took hours. Under oath, behind closed doors, she laid out everything. From the day she was admitted into the hospital, frail, unconscious, vulnerable, to the moment she realized her husband had gutted her company behind her back. She told them about the hidden accounts, the fake investments, the manipulation. She played the audio of Mark plotting her erasure. She handed over the offshore documentation, the forensic reports, the depositions from former board members who had turned under pressure. And she did it all without blinking. By the time she left the stand, several jurors refused to meet her eyes. Because they knew. This wasn't just about money. This was about betrayal. A woman erased while she fought for her life. Outside, the city buzzed. Reporters clustered along the steps now, cameras pointed at the doors, waiting for any development. And it came fast. By 4 p.m., an arrest warrant was issued for Mark Caldwell on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice. A federal marshal located him inside a luxury condo in Tribeca, mid-call with his attorney. When they walked in, Mark tried to play innocent, until they laid the evidence in front of him. Then he went quiet. Not angry, just stunned. Because deep down, Mark had always believed Sarah would give up. That she'd go away quietly. That she'd be afraid of what came next. But she hadn't. And now the law had caught up. That night, the news exploded. Tech entrepreneur arrested in massive fraud case involving wife's company. Whistleblower CEO delivers key evidence in billion-dollar fraud ring. Caldwell scandal grows. Federal agencies link scheme to international money laundering network. But Sarah didn't celebrate. She was in a secure location with her sister and the kids, their identities protected, her security team stationed outside. She didn't drink champagne. She didn't post online. She just sat in silence, holding Lila's hand, grateful her family was safe. The next morning, Emily called with an update. They've frozen all of Mark's domestic accounts, she said. And Reyes. Sarah braced herself. He's gone. What? His Star Island property was found empty. Documents burned. Hard drives destroyed. The feds think he fled. Probably through the Bahamas. Sarah's chest tightened. So he walks. Not exactly, Emily said. Interpol flagged a private jet registered under one of his shell companies. It was grounded in Lisbon. They're detaining the pilot. The net's closing, but we don't know how long it'll take. Sarah nodded slowly. So it's not over yet. No. But we've cut the head off the domestic side. Mark was their anchor here. And he's sinking. Later that day, Sarah returned to her old office. Not as an employee. Not even as a CEO. But as the woman who built it, and the one who had almost lost it all. The board had resigned in full. The shareholders had demanded accountability. And a new interim board had asked Sarah to return, not to lead the company, but to rebuild it. This time on her own terms. She walked through the halls slowly, seeing familiar desks, worn chairs, memories embedded into walls that had seen both success and sabotage. Jason joined her on the 15th floor, where her old office had been. "It's yours again if you want it," he said. Sarah turned to him, eyes steady. "No, I'll start fresh. New office, new vision, no ghosts." He smiled. "You're not done, are you?" "Not even close," she said. "We beat Mark. Reyes is on the run. But the system that allowed this. The one that looked the other way while I was in a hospital bed, and they dismantled everything I built." She looked out over the city skyline. "I'm going after that next." That evening, as the sun set behind the steel and glass of downtown Manhattan, Sarah sat on her rooftop terrace alone. The wind was calm. The lights of the city blinked like stars fallen to earth. She didn't feel victorious. She felt clear. For the first time in months, there were no lies left to outrun. No threats looming in silence. Just her truth, raw, brutal, and intact. She picked up her phone and opened a new document. Title: "While I Was Hospitalized." And she began to write. 6 months later, everything looked different. The courthouse steps were quiet now, the marble washed clean by spring rains. No reporters. No sirens. Just the occasional bird cutting through the calm as Sarah Caldwell, no longer Sarah Caldwell, walked down the steps alone, a slim folder tucked under her arm. Inside it was the final decree. Divorce granted, assets separated, all claims closed. Her name was restored. Her company fully returned to her control. Mark had taken a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison. No parole for at least 3. He'd lost the penthouse, the cars, the stocks. Every dollar traced back to Sarah's company was ordered to be repaid, though she knew she'd likely never see a cent. That wasn't the point anymore. Reyes was still at large. But the noose was tightening. Interpol had frozen 7 of his accounts, and every border he tried to cross lit up a dozen systems. He wasn't a ghost anymore. He was a fugitive. And Sarah, she was free. But freedom wasn't simple. The first time she walked back into the boardroom, she noticed how many people avoided her gaze. Some out of guilt, some out of fear, some because they still couldn't believe she'd survived. Not just physically, but professionally, personally, publicly. "I'm not here to be feared," she told them. "I'm here to rebuild, not just what was stolen, but what was broken long before the theft." And she did. She rehired the assistants, the developers, the engineers who had been pushed out during the storm. She scrapped the bloated PR firm and replaced them with a lean, in-house team focused on transparency. She started hosting open office hours, personally answering questions from interns and junior staff. For the first time since the company's founding, people weren't afraid to speak up. Outside work, she moved into a new apartment. Not high-rise and cold like the one she'd shared with Mark, but warm, filled with books and floor plants and the kind of stillness she hadn't known she craved. She reconnected with her father, who had fallen silent during the mess. They shared a quiet dinner one night in Brooklyn. He apologized, not for what Mark had done, but for not knowing how to help. "I didn't think you'd want to see me weak," he said. "I didn't need you to be strong," she replied. "I just needed you to be there." They hugged for the first time in years. One Sunday, she visited her hospital room, the one where it all began. She stood in the doorway, hands in her coat pockets, staring at the empty bed where she'd once drifted in and out of pain, completely unaware of what was happening to her world. The nurse on duty recognized her. They spoke briefly. Sarah donated a set of tablets for patients in long-term care, and left behind a letter she hoped someone like her would someday find. It read, "If they take everything while you're down, take it back when you rise. You are not what they did. You are what you survive." That summer, Sarah launched a foundation, Shield Initiative, a legal and financial support network for women blindsided by economic abuse during illness or trauma. She partnered with firms, nonprofits, medical centers. Survivors began reaching out. Some told her she saved their lives. Others just said thank you. She never claimed to be a hero. She only ever said, "I know how it feels to be erased. I won't let it happen to someone else if I can help it. And then, one afternoon in August, she received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single note. You were never supposed to make it out alive. I underestimated you. That was my mistake. There was no signature. No fingerprints. Just ink on paper. She folded it, slid it back into the envelope, and locked it away in a drawer. Let them watch. Let them know she was still standing. But they would never touch her again. The book she started writing on that rooftop. It was finished now. While I was hospitalized. Hit the New York Times bestseller list in 3 weeks. Part memoir, part manifesto. Publishers begged her for a sequel. But Sarah had already decided. Her next story wouldn't be about pain. It would be about power. Real power, the kind no one could steal, fake, or buy. She didn't need revenge anymore. She had something better. She had peace. On the last page of her book, she left readers with one final message. They took everything. And then I remembered. I was never everything because of what I had. I was everything because of who I am. And I will never be invisible again.